Hey, everyone, pause for a moment and imagine this. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway just 21 miles wide, has suddenly turned into a flashpoint that's making the entire planet hold its breath. This isn't some Hollywood action movie scenario. It's a real situation unfolding right now. And this is not a demonstration of American strength, nor is it any kind of clever diplomatic maneuver. It is, in fact, one of the most significant self-inflicted wounds in the history of modern U.S. foreign policy. In just a few short weeks, everything has been thrown into disarray. Allies turning away, partners growing frustrated, the global economy starting to wobble and exposing a harsh truth that Washington's strategy toward Iran is alarmingly hollow. What's even more astonishing is that the people who designed this plan don't seem to realize what they've just done. Today, I'm going to walk you through this story as directly as possible. No sugarcoating, no sidestepping. What began as a vital oil transit route has quickly become the clearest signal yet that America's global credibility is in free fall and that a new world order is emerging, one Washington is completely unprepared to handle. By the end, you'll understand why a small strait can shake the entire global economy and why this latest U.S. decision isn't just a mistake, but a historic turning point. To understand what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, we have to see it as more than just a narrow stretch of water on the map. It is the main artery of the modern world. At its narrowest point, it's only 21 miles wide, yet nearly 20% of the world's oil and gas flows through it. And it's not just about fuel. Fertilizers that sustain billions of people, aluminum used in construction across Asia and Africa, helium for medical imaging in hospitals, liquefied gas that heats homes in both Europe and East Asia, all of it passes through here. Shut it down, and you effectively cut off the lifeblood of global industry. For decades, the United States positioned itself as the gatekeeper of this passage. In 1980, President Carter made it explicit. Any attempt to control the Persian Gulf would be seen as a direct assault on vital U.S. interests. Aircraft carriers, military bases, and security commitments to Gulf states were all built on that promise that America would keep these sea lanes open. Whatever the controversies supporting authoritarian regimes or engaging in military interventions, the underlying logic was consistent. We are the stabilizing force. We keep the system running. But then, in a very short span of time, everything changed. In late February this year, after the United States and Israel carried out airstrikes on Iranian territory, Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz. This wasn't some irrational or terrorist act, as some were quick to label it. It was the response of a sovereign state to a direct attack on its soil, deploying the most powerful economic weapon at its disposal. The world reacted immediately. The head of the International Energy Agency called it the worst energy shock in history, worse than the oil crises of the 1970s, even more severe than the disruptions caused by the war in Ukraine. That's not exaggeration. It's a cold assessment from a typically cautious and conservative institution. And just as the crisis reached a critical point, the Trump administration chose to escalate further. They imposed a second blockade. The justification was that Iran had begun charging ships up to $2 million per transit through the strait. And so the U.S. would intercept any vessel that paid those fees. The result? Both sides effectively sealed the strait. Iranian vessels on one side, U.S., destroyers on the other, and the world's energy supply trapped in between. Think about that for a moment. The entire global economic system being choked by two overlapping blockades. And it becomes even more serious when you zoom out to the bigger picture. Take China first. Nearly all of Iran's oil, around 98%, flows to China. This isn't hidden. It's publicly available trade data. The U.S. knows this, yet it still moved to block a primary energy supply line to its largest trading partner, while simultaneously preparing for a presidential summit in Beijing and talking about stabilizing bilateral relations. Those two moves are fundamentally incompatible. China responded in its typically measured diplomatic language, but the message was unmistakable. It called the U.S. action dangerous and irresponsible. By Beijing standards, that's close to the strongest condemnation you'll hear. And what about India? A country the U.S. has heavily invested in as a counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific. India imports over 85% of its crude oil, about 5.5 million barrels per day, and depends heavily on flows through the Strait of Hormuz. When the strait shuts down, India immediately loses about 3 million barrels per day. Its strategic reserves can only last around 30 days. Yet instead of easing pressure or supporting a key strategic partner, the U.S. tightened the blockade further, right as India's waiver to purchase Russian oil had just expired. The message to New Delhi was unmistakable. Partnership with the United States is conditional, and when confrontation is prioritized, your vital interests come second. This is how the U.S. is managing alliances in 2026. Its most important partner in Asia is watching its economy bleed, its industrial base starting to seize up, and Washington keeps turning the screw. Experts are now forecasting oil prices could surge to $150 per barrel. The International Monetary Fund has already downgraded global growth projections and warned of a downside scenario. And when the IMF uses language like downside risk, it's time to take things very seriously. And this doesn't stop at economics. It is fundamentally shaking the credibility and leadership capacity of the United States on the global stage. What do you think when even America's closest allies refuse to follow? The United Kingdom and France, two of NATO's longest-standing members, openly declined to join the blockade. They didn't just stay silent or sidestep the issue. They organized a separate conference of world leaders to find a way to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Not to support the United States, but clearly to fix what the U.S. itself had set in motion. Picture the scene. The U.S. launches a half-measured military campaign, and its closest allies step in to do something that directly contradicts it. That's not a minor disagreement, it's a public judgment. These are countries that understand how Washington operates better than anyone. Nations that have cooperated with the U.S. for decades, now saying this policy is both illegitimate and illogical. Trump responded by publicly criticizing NATO, expressing frustration that allies weren't falling in line, while simultaneously insisting they still supported the U.S. It's like lighting a fire in a crowded room, watching everyone run, and then claiming they all agree with me. The situation becomes even more serious when viewed through the lens of international law. The U.S. has long invoked freedom of navigation to justify its naval operations, especially in the South China Sea, portraying itself as a defender of the rules-based order. Yet in this case, it is doing the exact opposite of what international law governing straits allows. A retired U.S. admiral even stated bluntly on American radio that under international law, blocking a country's ability to export goods constitutes an act of war, not a diplomatic tool. That's the assessment of a U.S. naval officer, not Iran, not China. Now, consider Iran's response. The U.S. objective is clear. Force Iran to reopen the strait and come to the negotiating table on Washington's terms. The assumption is that enough pressure will eventually compel compliance. This isn't a new strategy. For nearly 50 years, the U.S. has employed every form of sanctions: comprehensive, targeted, maximum pressure, secondary sanctions, all based on one core assumption: that Iran will ultimately act rationally and compromise when the cost of resistance becomes too high. But reality has long contradicted that assumption. Iran is not panicking. It is not speaking like a government on the verge of capitulation. On the contrary, Iran's parliamentary speaker posted an image of U.S. gasoline prices with a remark along the lines of, "Enjoy current prices now, you'll remember $4 or $5 per gallon." The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a clear warning that any warship approaching the strait would be treated as violating a ceasefire and would face strong retaliation. Iranian newspapers have even published cartoons depicting Trump sinking in the strait, with captions like "fraud at sea." You might see these as aggressive or provocative, but one thing is hard to deny. Iran is projecting confidence. It believes it is winning a war of endurance. The costs being borne by the global economy, by U.S. allies, and by Washington's credibility are rising far faster than the costs Iran itself is paying. And that calculation, uncomfortable as it may be, is not without basis. For now, the strait has reopened. Markets have breathed a sigh of relief. Some vessels have turned back without incident. But this is a pause, not a solution. Iran's nuclear program continues. Its uranium stockpiles remain. Hezbollah is still active in southern Lebanon. Israeli forces are still present on Lebanese territory. The existing sanctions regime remains intact. The core issue has not been resolved. What real security guarantees is the United States willing to offer Iran in exchange for meaningful nuclear concessions? Any upcoming negotiations, if they happen, will be the real test. If President Trump personally travels to Pakistan for a second round of talks, that would signal seriousness, but symbolism and substance are not the same. The history of U.S.-Iran negotiations is full of moments that appeared to be breakthroughs, only to collapse under the weight of fundamental differences in what each side actually needs. Iran will not dismantle its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for temporary sanctions relief. What it seeks is a fundamentally different relationship: respect for sovereignty, freedom from constant security threats, and a permanent end to coercive economic measures. The question is whether the Trump administration, under domestic pressure and influence from allies like Israel or Saudi Arabia, can offer anything close to that. For now, caution and realism are the only sensible approach. Today, the Strait of Hormuz is open again. Markets are reacting positively. But keep your eyes on three things: the Strait of Hormuz, uranium centrifuges, and the situation in southern Lebanon. If any one of these heats up again, everything could shift within 30 days. This could be the beginning of a new geopolitical alignment, or just a brief pause in a deeper conflict whose roots remain unresolved. History isn't written in a single afternoon. It is shaped by accumulated decisions over days, months, and years, either building something durable or exposing that the idea of progress was an illusion all along. But what's the reality on the ground? The Strait of Hormuz has reopened. Dozens of vessels have turned back without major incidents, and markets have let out a collective sigh of relief. Oil prices have temporarily cooled, and people are starting to talk about a turning point and cautious optimism. On the surface, it sounds like things are stabilizing. But let's be clear, this is a pause, not an ending. The fundamentals remain unchanged. Iran's nuclear program hasn't stopped for a single moment. Its enriched uranium stockpile is still intact. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon remains organized and fully operational. Despite ceasefire agreements on paper, Israeli forces are still present on Lebanese territory. The decades-long sanctions regime remains firmly in place. And the biggest question remains unanswered: what real security guarantees is the United States willing to offer Iran in exchange for meaningful nuclear concessions? Right now, everything is still ambiguous. If upcoming talks in Pakistan do take place, and if President Trump personally flies in for a second round, that would signal a significant political gamble by Washington. When a president engages directly in negotiations, it carries weight. It means political capital is on the line, and failure would come at a high cost, both domestically and internationally. But symbolism is one thing, substance is another. The history of U.S.-Iran relations is full of moments that appeared to be breakthroughs, only to collapse when core issues came into focus. Iran has learned from decades of experience. It will not dismantle its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for temporary sanctions relief lasting a few months. What it seeks, if it is to make real and irreversible concessions, is a fundamentally different relationship with the international system, one where its sovereignty is genuinely respected, its security is no longer under constant external threat, and coercive economic tools are no longer used as a permanent sword hanging overhead. The question is whether the Trump administration, under pressure from domestic politics and regional allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia, can offer anything close to that. For now, the most honest stance is caution. Not overly pessimistic, but certainly not prematurely optimistic. So from here on, keep a close eye on three things. First, the Strait of Hormuz, whether stability there is real or just temporary. Second, Iran's uranium centrifuges, whether they slow down or keep spinning. Third, the situation in southern Lebanon, whether Israeli forces withdraw or the area becomes the next flashpoint. If even one of these heats up again, the entire picture could shift within 30 days. What's happening in the Strait of Hormuz today is not just an energy crisis. It's one of the clearest signals that an old era is beginning to unravel. America's credibility as the guardian of global sea lanes is being seriously questioned. Washington's ability to lead and to rally allies is showing clear limits. And a new geopolitical reality is taking shape. One, the United States does not yet seem fully prepared, strategically or psychologically, to handle. History is not written in a single afternoon. It is shaped by accumulated decisions over days, months, and years, either building something durable or exposing that what once looked like progress was, in fact, an illusion. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you found this analysis helpful in understanding what's happening in the world, consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on the Strait of Hormuz situation. Do you see this as a major strategic mistake by the US or a calculated move? I'll continue to follow developments closely and provide updates in upcoming videos. See you in the next one, and have a great day.